The lights inside Walker's Cove ran dim the way forgotten places do. Not dark enough to hide in, not bright enough to be seen clearly. Just that middle ground where men went to disappear for a few hours to let the weight of the day slide off their shoulders and pool on the scarred wooden floor beneath their boots. The bar sat 3 miles off the main highway outside Port Regent Naval Station, wedged between a shuttered laundromat that hadn't opened since 2019 and a crab shack that only served customers 4 months out of the year. The building itself looked like it had been there since the Cold War, all weathered planks and salt-stained windows, the kind of structure that had seen better days and made peace with never seeing them again. Inside, the jukebox hadn't worked in 6 years. The floor had that soft give from decades of spilled beer and boot traffic. The walls were covered in faded photographs of ships and sailors, men in dress whites from wars most people had forgotten. There was no dress code, no loud music, and most importantly, no questions asked, which is exactly why the parking lot was always full by 8 p.m., February 19th, 2024. Thursday night. The air inside tasted like fried food and old wood. She sat in the corner booth with her back to the wall, not to the door. A distinction most people missed, but the ones who noticed understood what it meant. She wore civilian clothes. Dark hoodie, black cargo pants, no patches, no badges, no jewelry, except a simple watch on her left wrist. No makeup. Hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. 28 years old, but her eyes looked older. Much older. In front of her sat a glass of water with a lemon wedge and a plate of fries she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. She wasn't scrolling through her phone. Wasn't reading. Just watching the television mounted above the bar with the sound turned off, weather radar tracking storm systems across the Pacific, green and yellow swirls moving across a dark blue screen. Her name was Sloan Ashford, though nobody in Walker's Cove knew that. To them, she was just another face passing through. Another contractor, maybe? Or somebody's girlfriend waiting for their shift to end. She didn't correct the assumption. The bartender, a man named Liam with gray stubble and tattoos running up both forearms, passed by her table and set down a fresh glass of ice water without a word. No smile, no small talk, just a subtle nod. She returned it the same way. One of those wordless exchanges between people who understood that silence was its own kind of respect. Liam had served 20 years in the Navy before his knees gave out. He'd seen enough to know when someone wanted to be left alone, and more importantly, when someone deserved to be. The woman in the corner booth carried herself with a stillness that spoke volumes if you knew how to listen. She hadn't spoken since she walked in 40 minutes ago. That quiet shattered at 2100 hours when the door swung open and 4 men entered like they owned the oxygen in the room. They wore tan camouflage uniforms, sleeves rolled to the elbows despite the February chill outside, chest pockets sagging from too many field rotations, boots dusty and unlaced at the top, the casual sloppiness of men who just finished a long day and didn't care about regulations anymore. Their laughter came first loud and unrestrained, the kind that announced their presence before they'd even cleared the doorway. Marines, not locals, not regulars, temporary. The kind of men whose assignments gave them just enough time to grow comfortable, but not long enough to learn the unspoken rules of places like this. The tallest one led the way. Broad shoulders, a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite, and a scar running beneath his left eye that caught the dim light as he moved. His name tape read Crane. Sergeant Thatcher Crane, 29 years old, with the kind of swagger that came from being told you were good at your job for so long that you started believing you were invincible. Behind him came the others. Corporal Wyatt Drummond, shorter and wiry, with restless eyes that never settled on anything for more than a second. Private Cole Brennan, thick-necked and quiet, the kind who laughed at everything his superiors said, whether it was funny or not. And Private Finley Rhodes, the youngest at 24, with an observer's face taking everything in, but saying nothing. They claimed the high-top table near the center of the bar, scraping chairs back, loudly dropping their field packs on the floor with heavy thuds that made the old floorboards creak. Crane waved Liam down with 2 fingers and a grin that showed too many teeth. "Rounds for the table," he said, voice carrying across the room. "Top shelf. We're celebrating." Liam moved behind the bar without hurry, pulling glasses down from the rack. "Celebrating what? 6 months deployment in the Pacific, 3 days of leave before we ship back out, and the only decent bar within 10 miles that doesn't play country music." Wyatt leaned back in his chair, boots propped on the rung of Cole's seat. "Plus the food here doesn't taste like cardboard, which is basically 5-star dining after what we've been eating." They laughed. The kind of easy, self-satisfied laughter of men who thought they'd earned it. Finley was the first to notice her. He didn't say anything right away, just glanced toward the corner booth and let his gaze linger for a moment. The woman in the dark hoodie with her back to the wall, sitting alone staring at the silent television like she was watching something the rest of them couldn't see. 10 o'clock, Finley murmured. Solo table, civilian. Crane followed his gaze, then shrugged. Contractor, maybe. Or somebody's ex waiting for him to show. Wyatt grinned. Thinks she's lost. Thinks she's smart, Finley said quietly, sitting where she can see the whole room. Jesus Rhodes, not everything's a tactical situation. Crane took a long pull from his beer. She's probably just antisocial. From her corner, Sloane didn't react. Didn't shift in her seat, didn't look their direction. She simply lifted her water glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down in the exact center of the coaster. Her movements were precise, controlled, like someone who'd trained every gesture to be intentional. The Marines kept talking, their volume gradually increasing with each round. Wyatt started doing impressions of their commanding officer, exaggerating the man's gravelly voice until the table howled. Cole spun an elaborate story about a night jump gone wrong in the Philippines, clearly embellished, but nobody called him on it because the point wasn't truth, it was entertainment. And through it all, Sloane watched the weather radar, green and yellow swirls moving across blue. It was Crane who made the first mistake. He'd been gesturing broadly, telling some story about a bar fight in Okinawa, his arms sweeping wide to demonstrate how he'd supposedly thrown a punch. His elbow caught the edge of his beer glass, and the momentum sent it tipping. The amber liquid arced through the air in a perfect parabola, catching the dim light before splashing across her table. Half the fries were instantly soaked. The water glass tipped but didn't fall. A thick stream of beer ran across the scarred wood, dripping slowly into her lap. For exactly 3 seconds, the entire bar went silent. Even the pool game in the back corner stopped, two men with cues frozen mid-shot watching. Then came the laughter. Crane turned, saw the mess, and held both palms up in mock surrender. Well, my bad. His tone carried no apology, just that casual dismissiveness of someone who expected to be forgiven because accidents happened, and what's the big deal? That one's on the chair, not me. Thing moved on its own. The table erupted. Wyatt slapped the tabletop. Damn thing's got a vendetta against beer. Probably seen too many Marines. Maybe she was sitting too close to a combat zone, Cole added, and they laughed harder. Sloane didn't look at them. She set her napkin down with deliberate care, picked up her water glass and moved it 3 inches to the left out of the spreading puddle. Then she began dabbing at her lap without urgency, without any visible emotion at all. Her face remained absolutely neutral, like this was the most mundane thing that had happened to her all week. And somehow that rattled them more than if she'd started shouting. Crane leaned back in his chair, watching her. You all right over there? Louder now, making sure the whole bar could hear him being magnanimous. Need a towel or maybe just a sense of humor. Liam appeared from behind the bar, silent as always, carrying a fresh napkin and a dry glass of water. He set them down in front of Sloane without comment. Appreciate it, she said quietly. It was the first time any of them had heard her voice, low and clear and measured, like someone who chose their words carefully because words had consequences. Wyatt leaned forward, elbows on the table. You're not going to throw that one back at us. Come on, we're all friends here. Sloane looked at him, just once. A single clean glance that lasted exactly 2 seconds, long enough to acknowledge he'd spoken, but not long enough to suggest she cared about his opinion. Then she went back to the napkin, carefully reorganizing her table, moving the plate aside, wiping down the wood. The absence of drama seemed to confuse them. Maybe she's just uptight, Wyatt muttered. Probably writing a Yelp review in her head right now, Cole said. 0 stars. Marines too rowdy. Management did nothing. 1, they chuckled, but it sounded forced now. Hollow. Because the woman hadn't given them what they expected. No anger, no embarrassment, no sharp retort they could laugh off and use as justification for why she couldn't take a joke. She'd simply absorbed the incident like water into sand and continued existing as if they were background noise. Sloane shifted her chair back slightly. Not away from them, just at an angle that opened her field of view. She could see the door now and the bar and their table all without having to turn her head. Then she exhaled once, barely audible, and went back to watching the weather radar. By the 4th round, the Marines had started orbiting her like flies around something they couldn't quite understand. Not directly, not obviously, just enough to keep her in their peripheral vision to see if the next provocation might produce some kind of reaction. She remained absolutely still. They didn't like that. Men rarely did when their expectations went unmet. Wyatt stood first, carrying his fresh drink with theatrical care, like he was trying very hard not to spill it, grinning at his buddies as he wandered toward her side of the bar. Truce drink, he announced, holding it out as he approached her table. Sloane didn't look up. He moved closer, the glass hovering near her elbow. Come on, least I can do after the beer incident. Fresh whiskey top shelf, no hard feelings. She glanced at the glass. Condensation was already forming on the outside, a small droplet tracing down to her coaster. No thank you. Not rude, not defensive, just final. Wyatt set it down anyway, right on her table, pushing it slightly toward her. When she didn't touch it, didn't even acknowledge it was there, he leaned closer. You're kind of a mystery, you know that. From the high top, Crane called out, Careful, Drummond. She might be CIA. Could be profiling all of us right now. Could be, Wyatt agreed, grinning. I always thought I had good bone structure for a file photo. The table laughed, and then so casually it almost looked accidental. Wyatt's elbow bumped the whiskey glass. It tipped. Not violently, not in a way that anyone could definitively call intentional. Just enough to send a slow wash of amber liquid across her table over the napkin she'd just folded, pooling at the edge before dripping off and soaking the cuff of her sleeve. The table roared. Sloane stared at the spreading stain for a long moment. Her expression didn't change. Not anger, not surprise, not even resignation. Just that same neutral assessment, like she was looking at data and calculating probabilities. Liam froze behind the bar, his hand on a beer tap, visibly weighing whether to intervene, and knowing that sometimes intervention only made things worse. Sloane stood. Her chair didn't scrape. She moved it with control, pulling it back smoothly, no sudden movements. She took 2 steps sideways, lifted the edge of her jacket to shake off the moisture, then turned. Not toward them, but toward an empty 2-top table near the far wall. She walked across the floor with perfect posture. No hurry, no visible tension, just someone relocating to a cleaner workspace. Before she sat down at the new table, she stopped, turned her head slightly, just enough so they could see her profile, and said very quietly, You should have spilled the first drink better. This one made it too obvious. The laughter died like someone had cut its throat. Wyatt blinked. What? But Sloane had already turned away, settling into the new chair with her back to the room, this time a tactical shift that spoke volumes to anyone paying attention. She was no longer observing them. She dismissed them as threats worth monitoring. At the high top, Crane leaned forward. Wait, what did she just say? Something about the first drink, Wyatt muttered, still standing where she'd left him, looking at his hand like he couldn't quite remember picking up the glass. No, Finley said, his voice cutting through the confusion, his brows knit together. She said we made it obvious. The second spill? She's saying we did it on purpose. They looked at each other, the alcohol suddenly not sitting as comfortably in their stomachs. That's insane, Cole said, but he didn't sound convinced. It was an accident. Was it? Finley's eyes were still on the woman now settled at her new table where Liam had already placed another glass of water. Because from where I'm sitting, it looked pretty deliberate. So what if it was? Crane's voice carried an edge, now that defensive sharpness of someone who knew they'd crossed a line but couldn't admit it. She's being dramatic. It's just beer. But the mood had shifted. The easy confidence had developed cracks. Because somehow, without raising her voice, without confronting them, without doing anything except move to a different table and speak one sentence, the woman in the corner had changed the entire atmosphere of the room. She didn't look at them again. She didn't have to. At the far end of the bar, in the shadows where the overhead lights didn't quite reach, sat a man they hadn't noticed. Older, maybe early 60s, with salt gray hair, cut military short, and forearms covered in faded tattoos that spoke of decades in deployments. He wore jeans and a simple black t-shirt, but something about the way he sat, the way he held his beer, suggested this wasn't someone who'd ever truly stopped being a soldier. His name was Garrett Blackwood, though his name tape for 38 years had read Master Chief. Retired now officially, though, men like him never really retired, they just changed uniforms. He'd been watching the entire scene with the detached interest of someone who'd seen this play out 1,000 times before. Young men with too much ego and not enough wisdom pushing boundaries to see what would happen, never considering that some boundaries pushed back. He'd recognized Sloane the moment she walked in. Would have recognized her anywhere. He'd trained her after all. Watched her go through BUD/S with a determination that put most men to shame. Seen her earn that trident on her chest through blood and sweat and a kind of stubborn resilience that couldn't be taught. And he'd been the one to suggest she be here tonight, in civilian clothes, alone, watching. Because sometimes the best way to evaluate men wasn't to see how they performed in training. It was to see how they treated people they thought didn't matter. Blackwood reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Old model because he didn't trust the new ones with their facial recognition and constant tracking. He opened his contacts, scrolled to a name, and typed out a short message. Phase 1 complete. They failed exactly as predicted. Ready for Phase 2. He hit send, finished his beer, and set a $20 bill on the bar. Liam caught his eye and nodded once. No words necessary. Blackwood stood at his knees, protesting quietly, and walked toward the door. As he passed the Marine's table, he let his eyes linger on them for just a moment, long enough for Finley to notice, long enough for the young private to feel the weight of judgment from someone who'd earned the right to judge. Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft pneumatic hiss. At their table, the Marines had gone quiet. The celebration had evaporated, replaced by something uncomfortable and undefined. They nursed their drinks without tasting them. "We should probably call it a night," Finley said finally. "Yeah." Crane pushed his glass away. "Early formation tomorrow anyway." They gathered their things with none of the noise and bluster from earlier, filed out into the February night where their breath formed clouds and the distant sound of surf rolled in from the Pacific. Inside Walker's Cove, Sloane Ashford sat at her new table and finally picked up one of her fries. It was cold now, but she ate it anyway, her eyes on the television where storm systems continued their endless migration across the ocean. She'd been here before. Not this bar specifically, but this situation. Men who underestimated her because they saw gender before competence. Men who assumed that silence meant weakness, that not responding meant she couldn't. They always learned eventually. Tomorrow morning at 0630, those 4 Marines would walk into a briefing room at Port Regent Naval Station. They'd be tired and slightly hungover and completely unprepared for what came next. They'd see her again. But not like this, not in civilian clothes with wet sleeves and quiet dignity. No. Tomorrow they'd see Lieutenant Sloane Ashford in her uniform with the gold trident above her left breast pocket and the rectangular black patch on her shoulder that opened every secure door on the installation. They'd see the woman who'd written their deployment orders, who'd evaluated their psychological profiles, who'd been granted authority to determine whether they were suitable for the Joint Task Force integration program. They'd see the woman they'd humiliated in a bar, except she'd be the one holding their careers in her hands. And in that moment, they'd understand what she'd known all along, that the most dangerous person in the room is never the one shouting. It's the one watching, waiting, remembering, the one who lets you keep talking until you've said everything she needs to hear. Sloane finished her water and stood. She left exact change on the table, including a generous tip for Liam, and walked to the door. Outside, the night air tasted like salt and coming rain. The parking lot was mostly empty, now just a few scattered vehicles under the yellow sodium lights. She climbed into a dark blue Ford Ranger older model practical, started the engine and sat for a moment, letting it warm up her hands steady on the wheel. Tomorrow would be interesting. Tomorrow they'd learn what she'd been trying to teach them tonight. That respect isn't demanded, it's demonstrated. And the people who deserve it most are usually the ones who never ask for it. She put the truck in gear and drove away from Walker's Cove, heading back toward base housing, the storm systems on the radar moving ever closer to shore. Behind her, the bar lights flickered once and went dark for the night. And in a small office at Port Regent Naval Station, Admiral Thompson read Blackwood's message and allowed himself a thin smile. He'd been skeptical when Blackwood had proposed this evaluation method. It seemed unnecessarily theatrical, potentially risky. But as usual, the old Master Chief had been right. You didn't learn about people by testing them in controlled environments. You learned about them by watching what they did when they thought nobody important was looking. The 4 Marines had just failed a test they didn't know they were taking. Now came the education. Admiral Thompson forwarded the message to his assistant with a single instruction. "Confirm Lieutenant Ashford for tomorrow's briefing, 0630, all 4 personnel required attendance." Then he shut down his computer, turned off his desk lamp, and looked out his office window at the dark expanse of the Pacific. Somewhere out there, storms were forming. Systems of low pressure and high winds that would crash into the California coast within days. But the real storm, he knew, would hit tomorrow morning in a briefing room when 4 Marines realized exactly what they'd done, and more importantly, who they'd done it to. He found himself looking forward to it. In a profession that often demanded patience and restraint, and the careful navigation of 1,000 regulations, there was something deeply satisfying about watching natural consequences play out. The old-fashioned kind of justice, the kind that didn't need paperwork or formal complaints, the kind where people simply learned because reality taught them. Admiral Thompson locked his office and walked to his car, through the quiet base, passing darkened buildings and distant lights where personnel stood watch through the night. Somewhere out there, Sloane Ashford was probably already asleep, resting easy. Because she'd done nothing wrong, and somewhere else, four Marines were probably lying awake, that uncomfortable feeling in their guts that told them they'd miscalculated something important, even if they couldn't quite identify what. By morning, they'd know. By morning, everything would be perfectly clear. The Master Chief always said that the best lessons were the ones you figured out yourself. The ones where someone gave you just enough rope and then stepped back to see what you'd do with it. Tonight, those four Marines had tied their own nooses. Tomorrow, they'd feel them tighten. And the woman they dismissed as irrelevant, the one they'd humiliated with spilled drinks and casual cruelty, she'd be the one standing calm and professional and utterly untouchable, watching them realize exactly how far they'd fallen. Not with satisfaction, not with revenge, just with the quiet certainty of someone who'd always known how this would end, because she'd lived it before. In different bars with different men, but always the same pattern. Underestimation, provocation, revelation, reckoning. She'd become fluent in the language of men who thought they were untouchable. And tomorrow morning, she'd teach them a new vocabulary, the vocabulary of consequences. The admin wing of Port Regent Naval Station came alive at 0530 with mechanical precision. Coffee machines sputtered to life. Overhead lights hummed their fluorescent greeting. Steel doors opened and closed with pneumatic hisses that echoed down corridors still half empty in the pre-dawn darkness. Lieutenant Sloan Ashford arrived at 0615, service khakis perfectly pressed, the gold seal trident catching overhead lights as she moved. The rectangular black patch on her left shoulder held clearance levels most personnel would never see. Her hair pulled back in regulation bun, not a strand out of place. She carried a single tablet under her left arm and walked with unhurried confidence toward briefing room Echo 7. Master Chief Garrett Blackwood entered at 0620, moving with that distinctive gait of someone whose knees had absorbed too many parachute landings over 38 years of service. 63 years old, gray hair, cut military short, faded tattoos visible beneath rolled sleeves. Gulf War Somalia Fallujah Ramadi. The decorations on his uniform told stories most men couldn't imagine surviving. He nodded to Sloan once. Professional acknowledgement. She returned it. The door opened at 0628. Four Marines entered in loose formation uniforms, hastily pressed boots, showing evidence of a quick polish job that hadn't quite succeeded. They looked exactly like men who'd gotten 4 hours of sleep and spent most of it wishing they'd stopped at 3 beers instead of 7. Sergeant Thatcher Crane let his jaw set in defensive posture. Behind him, Corporal Wyatt Drummond with dark circles under restless eyes. Private Cole Brennan staring at the floor. Private Finley Rhodes bringing up the rear, more alert than the others, already calculating what this morning might bring. Crane was halfway through the door when his eyes landed on Sloan. He froze mid-step. 2 seconds to process. The woman from the bar, the quiet one in the corner booth. Except she wasn't wearing civilian clothes now. She wore the uniform, the trident, the command patch. His face cycled through confusion, recognition, disbelief, horror. Behind him, Wyatt walked directly into his back. What the? Wyatt started, then followed Crane's line of sight. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Cole and Finley completed the picture, all four standing in the doorway like a photograph of the moment everything went wrong. Sloan let the silence stretch for exactly 5 seconds. Gentlemen, please close the door and find your seats. Her voice carried unmistakable authority. Not loud, not angry, just absolute. Crane moved first mechanically. He pulled the door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded deafening in the quiet room. They moved to the back row of chairs, each step carefully controlled, like men walking through a minefield who just realized they were standing on a trigger. Admiral Marcus Thompson entered with the bearing of someone who'd commanded respect for so long, he no longer had to ask for it. 58 years old, gray at temples, 3 rows of ribbons telling the story of 4 decades and a dozen conflicts. He closed the door and took position in the front row without comment. Sloan began. Good morning. Today marks the beginning of your Joint Task Force Integration Evaluation. For the next 2 weeks, you will participate in assessments designed to measure your suitability for combined operations where traditional service boundaries do not exist. She pressed a button on her tablet. The projection changed cross-service cohesion standards. This program exists because modern warfare requires operators who can function effectively alongside personnel from all branches. The ability to subordinate service loyalty to mission objectives. The ability to recognize competence regardless of where it comes from. Another slide, evaluation criteria. You will be assessed on tactical decision-making, adaptability under stress, team cohesion, and behavioral consistency. That last one is critical. Behavioral consistency means you conduct yourself with the same professionalism in all environments, on base and off base, in uniform and out of uniform. When you know you're being evaluated and when you think nobody's watching. She let that land. Crane's face had gone pale. Wyatt stared at the table. Cole's jaw muscles worked. Only Finley met her eyes, and in his expression, she saw understanding. I am Lieutenant Sloan Ashford, Navy SEAL Tactical Integration Officer. Master Chief Blackwood will serve as Senior Advisor. Admiral Thompson has final authority on all assessments. Sloan paused. Some of you may recognize me from Walker's Cove Bar. If that recognition makes you uncomfortable, I suggest you use that discomfort productively. Ask yourself why you feel that way. Ask yourself what you might have done differently. And most importantly, ask yourself if the person you were last night is the same person you want to be in this room. Dead silence. However, Sloan continued, her tone shifting slightly. This evaluation is not standard training. 3 weeks ago, intelligence reports flagged potential security threats at this installation. This program serves dual-purpose integration training and security vetting. Over the next 2 weeks, you will be tested not just for competence, but for judgment under pressure, loyalty, and capacity to handle classified operations. The 4 Marines exchanged glances. This was more serious than they'd anticipated. Questions. Nobody spoke. Then report to equipment's staging area at 0700. Combat load full kit. We start with tactical decision-making under simulated combat stress. Dismissed. The Marines stood like puppets with cut strings. They filed toward the door. Crane reached the door, first stopped, turned. Ma'am, about last night. Sloan raised her hand. What happened last night happened. It's data now, information I have about how you conduct yourself. What you do in this room over the next 2 weeks will be additional data. I suggest you focus on making that data more favorable than what currently exists. She didn't say it cruelly, just stated it as fact. Crane nodded once and left. When the door closed, Admiral Thompson allowed himself a slight smile. That was remarkably restrained, Lieutenant. Thank you, sir. Blackwood uncrossed his arms. They took it better than I expected. No excuses, no deflection, yet. They're still processing it, Sloan said. The excuses will come later. Thompson stood. The security angle adds weight. If any of them are actually compromised, this evaluation will expose it. Master Chief, monitor their communications. Lieutenant, watch for behavioral anomalies. Yes, sir. After Thompson left, Blackwood turned to Sloan. You know one of them might actually be compromised. The intel wasn't fabricated. I know. That's why I'm watching all 4. Last night's behavior could be just immaturity, or it could be signs of deeper issues, poor judgment, boundary violations, the kind of character flaws that make people vulnerable to recruitment. You really think one of those kids is working with domestic extremists? I think people surprise you, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. We'll find out which. The tactical decision-making course unfolded as expected. First run, Crane moved too fast, killed simulated civilians, mission failure. Second run, overcorrected, became indecisive team, took casualties. Third run followed textbook protocol that left them vulnerable to ambush. After 3 failures, Sloan called them to the observation deck. Sergeant Crane, walk me through your decision-making. Crane removed his helmet, sweat matting his hair. First run, I moved too fast. Second run, too slow. Third run, I followed protocol. And all 3 times you failed. Why, Bywington, bad luck. The scenarios were stacked against us. Sloan turned her tablet around, showing overhead tactical replay. These scenarios are based on real operations. Fallujah 2004, Mosul 2016. Nothing here is stacked. It's just reality. So I'll ask again, why did you fail? The variables kept changing. Variables always change. What was your actual mistake? Silence. Finley spoke from the back. He didn't listen. All eyes turned to him. First run, I suggested flanking approach to clear civilians before entry. You overruled me. Second run, I identified the hostile point 2 seconds before you hesitated. Third run, I recommended holding position and calling extraction support instead of moving through compromise route. Crane turned to face him. You're a private. I'm the sergeant. I made command decisions. No, sir. You made ego decisions. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Blackwood stepped forward. Stand down, both of you. His voice carried weight accumulated over decades. Both Marines fell silent immediately. Private Rhodes, you're correct in your tactical assessments. Sergeant Crane, you're correct that you hold command authority. The question is whether authority and judgment are aligned. He moved to stand beside Sloan. I spent 38 years in the teams. Gulf War, Mogadishu, Fallujah, Ramadi. You know what separated operators who survived from ones who came home in boxes? Not rank, not aggression, not even skill. It was ability to recognize when someone else had better information and swallow your pride long enough to listen. He pointed at the tactical replay. 1993 Mogadishu. I was a chief petty officer. Young Strong thought I knew everything. My lieutenant, younger than me, suggested we position air support closer. I overruled him, said we didn't need it, that it would compromise stealth. Blackwood's expression hardened. 18 hours later, we were surrounded, no air support, no extraction. 2 men died because I was too proud to listen to someone younger than me with better judgment that day. He let that sit. You think this morning was punishment for last night? You're wrong. This is opportunity. The opportunity to learn a lesson in controlled environment instead of when real bullets fly and real blood spills. Sloan stepped forward. You have 5 minutes, huddle up. Talk to each other honestly without rank getting in the way. Figure out how you're approaching the 4th attempt. Because you will run this scenario again until you succeed or until I decide you're incapable of learning. 5 minutes. Go. The 4 Marines moved to the far corner. Through the reflection in the observation glass, Sloan watched them. Crane did most of the talking at first. Then Finley said something that made him stop. Wyatt added something. Cole made a point that had others nodding. By minute 4, they'd formed consensus. At minute 5, they returned. We're ready, Crane said. Different tone now. Less command, more statement of fact. What's changed? I'm not calling shots alone. We're operating as team. Finley has point-on-target identification. Wyatt handles civilian management. Cole provides rear security. I coordinate, but I don't dictate. And if you disagree with someone's call, we discuss it, fast, but we discuss it. Sloan studied him, then nodded. Run it again. The 4th attempt took 22 minutes. They moved methodically, communicating constantly, adjusting in real time. When Finley called potential civilian in doorway, Crane held fire and moved to better angle before confirming. When Wyatt suggested splitting the team, they discussed it for 15 seconds before agreeing. The extraction went differently too. Instead of following standard protocol, they adapted. Set up defensive perimeter, called for simulated air support, waited 3 minutes under simulated fire which felt like eternity, but kept the target safe behind cover. When the scenario ended with target successfully extracted and 0 civilian casualties, the silence in observation deck was different. Not tense, just thoughtful. Acceptable, Sloan said. Not perfect, but acceptable. The split team maneuver created a 90-second window where you had no mutual support. In real scenario, that's where ambushes happen. But you recognized the problem, communicated it, and recovered. That's improvement. She looked at each of them. Day 1 of 14 is complete. Tomorrow we move to high-stress interrogation resistance. You're dismissed until 1300 hours. As they filed out, Wyatt lingered near the door. Sloan noticed. Something you want to say, Corporal? He hesitated then. Ma'am, can I ask why you're doing this? Last night we treated you like garbage. You could have just failed us all and moved on. Why give us a chance? Sloan considered her answer carefully. Because 3 years ago, someone gave me a chance I didn't deserve. And that chance changed everything. What happened? Not your concern right now. But I'll tell you this, people are capable of change when they have the right motivation and the right environment. This evaluation is both. Whether you use it is up to you. Wyatt nodded slowly and left. After they had all gone, Blackwood approached. That story about someone giving you a chance. You're talking about your father. I'm talking about after my father died, when I blamed myself for not being there. When I started making reckless decisions because I thought I had nothing left to lose. You pulled me aside, told me that survivors carry weight, but we don't have to carry it alone. That changed my trajectory. I remember, you were about to request combat deployment to the worst possible place, hoping something would happen. And you stopped me, made me realize that honoring the dead doesn't mean joining them. It means becoming someone they'd be proud of. Blackwood was quiet for a moment. Those 4 Marines, one of them is going to remind you of yourself at various points in this evaluation. That's intentional. I specifically requested them for this program. You picked them, why? Because they're all dealing with something. Crane with family pressure, Wyatt with systemic injustice, Cole with lack of direction, Finley with being overlooked because of rank. They're all fighting battles that have nothing to do with the enemy and everything to do with themselves. You think I can help them? I think you're the only one who can, because you've been where they are. and you found your way out. That afternoon, during individual psych evaluations, Sloan conducted one-on-one interviews. Wyatt Drummond sat across from her at 1400 hours, clearly uncomfortable with the intimacy of a private conversation. Corporal, your file shows exemplary performance in field operations, but multiple behavioral incidents in garrison. Fighting insubordination, general disrespect toward authority. Walk me through that pattern. Wyatt's jaw tightened. Permission to speak freely. Granted. The military failed my sister. Sloan didn't react. Explain. 3 years ago, Camp Lejeune, she was assaulted by her commanding officer. She filed a complaint. They buried it, protected him because he was valuable, transferred her to different unit, different base, told her to move on. She tried, but it destroyed her. She left the Corps, couldn't hold a job, started drinking. Last I heard, she was in rehab somewhere in Nevada. He looked directly at Sloan. So when I see authority figures, especially female ones, I see the system that failed her. I see people who chose institution over individual, and I get angry. And that's why you spilled the drink on me. Not because I was a woman, but because I represented the system. Maybe, I don't know, I was drunk and angry and you were just there, available. Sloan leaned forward. I understand your anger, Corporal. The system did fail your sister. Specific people made cowardly decisions, but there are also people in this system who fight for individuals, who hold perpetrators accountable. Like me, like Master Chief Blackwood, like Admiral Thompson. We exist. One good officer doesn't fix a broken system. No, it doesn't, but it's a start. And if you spend your career punishing every authority figure for the failures of a few, you'll never be part of the solution. You'll just be another angry person making the system worse. Wyatt looked away. What am I supposed to do? Just forgive and forget? No, remember and do better. When you make rank, when you have Marines under your command, you become the officer your sister needed. You become someone who protects the vulnerable instead of the powerful. But you can't do that if you're stuck in rage. She pulled out her tablet, made a note. I'm going to do something I shouldn't. I'm going to look into your sister's case. No promises, but if there's anything still actionable, I'll make sure it gets to people who care about the right outcome. Wyatt stared at her. Why would you do that? Because your sister deserved better. And because maybe if I help her get some measure of justice, you'll stop seeing every woman in uniform as complicit in what happened to her. Ma'am, don't thank me yet. I haven't done anything. Just know that I heard you. That's more than most people get. Use it wisely. After Wyatt left, Sloan sat alone in the interview room thinking about systems and failures and the weight of wearing a uniform that represented both the best and worst of military culture. Her tablet buzzed. Message from Blackwood. Need you in my office. Something's come up. She found him reviewing security footage in his small office on the north side of the building. What am I looking at? Last night, 2300 hours, parking lot camera. He pointed at the screen. That's Crane and Wyatt having a conversation near Crane's vehicle. The footage showed the two Marines talking, gesturing. No audio, but body language suggested intensity. Why does this matter? Because right after this conversation, Wyatt made a phone call that lasted 17 minutes to a number not in his service record. Not family, not girlfriend, not anyone we can identify. Sloan felt her stomach tighten. You think he's the compromised one? I think we have anomalous behavior that needs explanation. Could be innocent, could be something else. Thompson wants you to push him harder in next few days. See if stress reveals anything. And if he breaks the wrong way, then we've identified a threat before it becomes operational. That's the point of this evaluation. Sloan studied the footage. Wyatt's body language showed stress, anger, defensiveness. But that could be explained by their conversation earlier about his sister. Or it could be something else entirely. I'll watch him closely, but Chief, I need you to trust my judgment on this. If I think he's clean, I'm going to say he's clean. I'm not asking you to manufacture evidence. I'm asking you to be thorough. There's a difference. Understood. Days 3 through 7 passed in a blur of training scenarios, each designed to break them down in different ways. High-stress interrogation resistance on day 4 revealed more about each Marine than hours of interviews ever could. Crane broke after 6 hours not because he gave up information, but because he finally admitted that his entire career had been about living up to his father's expectations, that he didn't know who he was outside of being Colonel Crane's son. Cole broke after 2 hours simply because he'd never developed the mental discipline to resist psychological pressure. He wasn't weak, just untrained in that specific skill set. Finley didn't break at all. Sat in silence for 12 hours, responding only with name, rank, serial number. When asked how he'd developed that level of mental discipline, he'd said simply, "I grew up poor. You learn to be invisible when you can't afford to be noticed." Wyatt's session was the most revealing. Under pressure, he'd revealed not just his sister's story, but his own. How he'd joined the military to escape poverty. How he'd believed the promises about honor and integrity. How every subsequent betrayal of those promises had felt personal. But he hadn't broken, hadn't given up information, had simply endured. Sloan watched all 4 sessions from the observation room, taking notes, building profiles, trying to understand who these men really were beneath the uniforms and bravado. On day 8, during navigation exercises in the hills outside base, Finley approached her during a rest break. "Ma'am, can I talk to you about something?" "Go ahead." "Last night in the barracks, I overheard Crane and Wyatt talking. They were discussing the evaluation, about how they need to prove themselves, how they can't just be adequate, they need to be exceptional. That's not unusual. Everyone wants to perform well. That's not what concerned me. What concerned me was Crane saying they should take risks during the next field exercise. Do something memorable that would show their initiative and courage." Sloane's attention sharpened. "Did he specify what kind of risks?" "No, but his tone suggested something significant, something beyond normal parameters." "Why are you telling me this?" Finley met her eyes directly. "Because 10 days ago I would have stayed quiet, would have thought it wasn't my place to question sergeants and corporals. But you taught us that competence matters more than rank. If I see something that might compromise the mission or get people hurt, I speak up, even if it's uncomfortable. You made the right call. I'll handle it." After Finley left, Sloan sat on the hillside overlooking the Pacific, thinking about trust and judgment and the fine line between giving people rope to grow and giving them rope to hang themselves. That evening, she called Crane into her office. "Sergeant, I'm going to be direct. I've heard you're planning to take unnecessary risks during upcoming exercises to impress me. Is that accurate?" Crane's face cycled through surprise, anger, then resignation. "Who told you? Doesn't matter. What matters is whether it's true. Ma'am, I just want to show that I'm serious about this program, that I've changed from the man in the bar. Then show it by executing orders perfectly, by making smart decisions, by leading your team effectively. I don't need heroes, Sergeant. I need operators who can follow mission parameters and bring everyone home alive. Heroes get people killed. But do you know how my father died?" The question stopped him cold. "No, ma'am. Afghanistan 2017. He had good intelligence about a high-value target. Could have called in air support, done it clean and safe. But he wanted to prove himself to his superiors. Wanted to show he could execute complex ground operations, so he took his team in personally. The intel was good, but it wasn't complete. They walked into an ambush. 6 men died because my father wanted to be exceptional instead of adequate." Sloan leaned forward. "I don't want you to be my father. I want you to be better than him. I want you to be the kind of leader who brings people home, even if it's not memorable, even if it's not exceptional, just effective and safe. Can you do that?" Crane was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, ma'am, I can do that." "Good, because on day 11, we're moving to live fire exercises, real bullets, real stakes. And I need to know that every person on that range is focused on the mission, not on proving something to me." After Crane left, Blackwood appeared in her doorway. "That story about your father, that's not how he died." "I know. He died in a vehicle accident during routine patrol. Nothing heroic, nothing memorable. Just bad luck and bad roads. But Crane doesn't need to know that. You lied to make a point. I used a hypothetical to illustrate a principle. There's a difference." Blackwood smiled slightly. "Your father would have done the same thing." "I know. He taught me that truth is important, but sometimes the lesson matters more than the accuracy." Day 10 arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain. The combat medicine exercise was set up in Building 12, the urban warfare simulator. Sloan had designed this scenario specifically to test their ability to maintain composure when everything was screaming chaos. Simulated casualties, blood packets, actors trained to grab and panic and scream realistically. She watched from the command bunker as they moved through the scenario, and for the first time in 10 days they functioned as a genuine team. Crane coordinating without dictating. Wyatt managing civilian actors with unexpected gentleness. Cole providing solid rear security. Finley triaging casualties with calm efficiency. When it was over, when they'd successfully treated every casualty and held the perimeter, Sloan felt something she hadn't expected. Pride. Not in herself, in them. They'd started as men who spilled drinks on strangers for entertainment. They were becoming operators who could save lives under fire. That evening at 1800 hours, Admiral Thompson called an emergency briefing. Sloan entered the secure conference room to find Thompson Blackwood and three people she didn't recognize. FBE Omni badges. Lieutenant Ashford, Thompson began without preamble. 48 hours ago, FBI intercepted communications suggesting a domestic extremist cell plans to attack the weapons depot on this base. Timeline day 12 between 2200 and 0200 hours. One of the FBI agents pulled up satellite imagery. 6 to 8 suspects, all former military, heavily armed. They've acquired schematics of the depot. Our intel suggests they're targeting Warehouse 7 nuclear materials temporarily stored during transport rotation. Sloan's mind raced. What's the local response capability? FBI HRT is 4 hours out. Base security capable, but not trained for this level of threat, which is why I'm activating your evaluation team for real-world operations. This is no longer a drill. Sir, they've only had 10 days of training. They're the best we have on base right now. 4 Marines with combat experience plus you providing overwatch. Master Chief Blackwood will coordinate from command. Blackwood stepped forward. Sloan, this is what we trained them for. Can they do it? She thought about the past 10 days. Crane learning to listen, Wyatt channeling his anger, Finley's tactical instincts, Cole following strong leadership. The combat medicine drill they just completed perfectly. Yes, she said finally, they can do it. Then you have until 2100 hours day 12 to brief and position your team. ROE is deadly force authorized. Neutralize threat, protect material, minimize casualties. Thompson's expression softened slightly. Your father would have trusted his team in a situation like this. I'm trusting you to do the same. After the briefing, Sloan stood alone in the corridor, feeling the weight of what was coming. Real mission, real bullets, real consequences. Blackwood found her there. You look like someone just dropped the world on your shoulders. Feels that way. 10 days ago, these men spilled drinks on me in a bar. Now I'm taking them into combat. If something goes wrong, it won't, because you've prepared them, because you've given them every tool they need to succeed. And because when the moment comes, you'll make the right calls. How can you be so sure? Because I trained you, and because you're your father's daughter, not in the ways he got wrong, but in the ways he got right. He believed people could be better than they were. So do you. That belief built this team. Now let it carry you through what comes next. Sloan nodded slowly. Day 12, real mission. They'll either prove they've changed or you'll learn something important about them. Either way, the truth comes out. That's all any of us can ask for. That night, alone in her quarters, as Sloan reviewed the mission parameters one more time, studied satellite imagery of Warehouse 7, calculated sight lines from potential sniper positions, identified choke points, escape routes, vulnerability windows, 1,200 yards, 7 hostiles maximum, 4 Marines on the ground, her providing overwatch. Everything had to be perfect, because in 36 hours, 4 Marines who'd started as targets of contempt would become operators she'd trust with her life. And if she'd misjudged them, if the past 10 days had been performance instead of transformation, people would die. She looked at her father's photo on the wall. I hope I'm doing this right. Hope I'm seeing them clearly. Hope I haven't let my desire to believe in change blind me to who they really are. The photo offered no answer. But somewhere in the base, 4 Marines were probably lying awake knowing that day 12 would define everything. Knowing that the woman they'd humiliated in a bar would be the one keeping them alive. And knowing that their actions over the next 2 days would determine not just their careers, but their character. The final test was coming. Not the one they'd trained for. The one that mattered. Day 11, 0600 hours. The briefing room felt different this morning. Smaller somehow, despite being the same dimensions as every other morning. The air tasted metallic, charged with something that hadn't been there during training exercises. Reality had a weight that simulation never quite captured. Sloan stood at the head of the table, her tablet displaying satellite imagery of Warehouse 7. The 4 Marines sat in the front row now, not the back. Closer, more engaged. The distance between them and her had collapsed over 10 days of shared struggle. Admiral Thompson stood beside her, his expression grave. Gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you is classified. You will not discuss this operation with anyone outside this room. You will not contact family, friends, or fellow service members. From this moment until mission completion, you are operationally dark. Understood. Yes, sir, they responded in unison. Thompson nodded to Sloan. She pressed a button. The satellite image zoomed in on the northern perimeter of Port Regent Naval Station. Warehouse 7, currently storing tactical nuclear materials during transport rotation. 6 to 8 domestic extremists, all former military, plan to attack this location tonight between 2200 and 0200 hours. She let that information settle. Wyatt leaned forward. Nuclear materials, Jesus. FBI intercepted communications 48 hours ago. The suspects have detailed schematics of the warehouse knowledge of security rotations and the training to execute a precision assault. Our assessment, they intend to steal the materials for sale to hostile foreign actors. Crane's jaw tightened. Why isn't FBI handling this? HRT is 4 hours out. SWAT teams are 2 hours minimum. The attack window is tonight. We're the only qualified response force on site with time to prepare and position. Finley studied the imagery. Ma'am, with respect, we've had 10 days of training. They're former military with combat experience. We're outmatched. In experience, yes. In preparation, no. They expect standard-based security response. They don't expect a SEAL providing overwatch and a trained fire team who've spent the past 10 days learning to function as a cohesive unit. Sloan zoomed the image out, highlighting positions around the warehouse. I'll be here. She pointed to a rooftop 1,200 yards northeast of the target. Elevated position, clear sight lines to 3 of the warehouse's 4 approaches. Sergeant Crane, you'll lead the ground element from here. She indicated a position at the south entrance. Corporal Drummond, west perimeter. Private Brennan, rear security. Private Rhodes, you're with Crane for entry coordination. She looked at each of them. I won't lie to you, this is dangerous. These men are professionals executing a well-planned operation. But you have advantages they don't. You have training they don't know you received. You have coordination they can't anticipate. And you have me watching every approach, ready to eliminate threats before they reach you. Crane spoke carefully. Ma'am, are we cleared for deadly force? ROE is deadly force authorized. You will neutralize the threat using all necessary means. These are not training rounds. These are not simulation targets. This is real combat with real consequences. Cole's face had gone pale. How many operations like this have you run, ma'am? Counting tonight, 14. And how many people have you lost? The question hung in the air. Sloan met his eyes directly. In 13 prior operations, I've lost 0 personnel under my direct command. I intend to keep that record tonight. But I need you to trust my calls, execute my orders, and function as the team you've become over the past 10 days. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, they said, stronger this time. Thompson stepped forward. Gentlemen, 10 days ago, you were Marines who made poor decisions in a bar. Today, I'm trusting you with one of the most critical security operations this base has ever faced. Lieutenant Ashford believes you're ready. Master Chief Blackwood believes you're ready. I'm choosing to believe them. Don't prove us wrong. We won't, sir. Dismissed. Equipment issue at 0900. Mission brief at 1500. Insertion at 2000 hours. Get some rest. You'll need it. After they left, Thompson turned to Sloan. You really think they can pull this off? I think they're capable. Whether they will depends on whether they've truly internalized the lessons of the past 10 days. Tonight we find out. And if they haven't, then I'll carry the mission myself. But I don't think it'll come to that. Blackwood entered through the side door carrying a coffee. FBI just sent updated intel. They've identified 2 of the suspects. Both former Army Rangers dishonorably discharged for theft and assault. The others are still unknown, but profiles suggest similar backgrounds. Disgruntled former military, Sloan said. They'll be competent, organized, and highly motivated. Worst possible combination. You've faced worse. I've faced worse alone. Tonight, I'm responsible for 4 other lives. You've been responsible for lives before. Not these lives, not people I've invested 10 days in rebuilding. Blackwood handed her a coffee. Your father used to say that command is caring about your people enough to risk them when the mission demands it and caring about the mission enough to risk yourself to bring them home. You're doing both. That's all anyone can ask. Chief, that phone call Wyatt made. The 17-minute conversation we couldn't trace. Did we ever identify who he was talking to? Fabia ran it down. His sister's rehab facility in Nevada. He was checking on her status, asking about visitation. Nothing operational. Sloan felt tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying ease slightly. So he's clean. They're all clean. Young, immature, made bad decisions, but clean. Tonight will prove whether they're also capable. At 1500 hours, Sloan ran the final mission brief in the secure planning room. A three-dimensional holographic display of Warehouse 7 rotated slowly in the center of the table. The four Marines studied it from different angles, asking questions, identifying potential problems. Sight lines from my position cover northeast and south approaches, Sloan explained. West approach is partially blocked by an adjacent building. Rhodes, that's why you're covering the west. If hostiles approach from that vector, your first response. Finley traced the approach route with his finger. If they're former military, they'll recognize the west approach as the blind spot. They might concentrate force there. Correct, which is why you'll have an M249 SAW in addition to your standard rifle. If they mass on west approach, you suppress until I can reposition for clean shots. Crane studied the warehouse interior layout. Once they're inside, we lose visual from external positions. If we have to breach, we're going in blind. You won't go in blind. I'll have thermal imaging from my position. I can track movement through the roof. I'll guide you through hostile armament positions. And if your position gets compromised, Wyatt asked, then Master Chief Blackwood assumes command from Tactical Operations Center. He'll coordinate FBI response and base security as backup. But my position won't get compromised. I've held positions like this in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria for days at a time without detection. 12 hours is nothing. She zoomed the display in on the warehouse interior. Nuclear materials are stored here in reinforced container Alpha 7. If hostiles reach the container, they'll need approximately 8 minutes to breach the locks and extract the materials. That's our mission window. We cannot allow them 8 uninterrupted minutes. What's our priority order? Crane asked. Neutralize threats or protect materials? Both. But if forced to choose, protect materials. If even one hostile escapes with nuclear material, the consequences extend far beyond this base. Cole raised his hand hesitantly. Ma'am, what if we fail? What if they get the materials? Sloan didn't sugarcoat it. Then FBI initiates Protocol 7 total base lockdown, Coast Guard blocks, Harbor Air Force scrambles fighters to enforce no-fly zone. Every road within 50 miles gets blocked. They'll activate every federal resource in California to prevent those materials from leaving the region. But that protocol takes time. Time for the hostiles to potentially hide or transfer the materials, which is why we will not fail. She looked at each of them. 10 days ago, I didn't trust you to complete a basic tactical scenario without killing civilians. Today, I'm trusting you with national security. That's not a statement about my desperation. It's a statement about your growth. You've earned this trust. Now prove it was justified. At 1800 hours, Sloan performed her pre-mission ritual. Alone in the armory, she field stripped and reassembled her SR-25 sniper rifle. Not because it needed it, the weapon had been professionally maintained, but because the familiar mechanical process centered her mind. Slide the bolt carrier group out. Check the firing pin. Inspect the extractor. Clean components that were already clean. Reassemble with practiced precision. Each piece fitting perfectly into place. Each component dependent on the others. Like a team. Blackwood found her there at 1900 hours. You're quiet, more than usual. Thinking about my father, about the story I told Crane. The fabricated one about him dying heroically. The real one about him dying in a mundane traffic accident. No glory, no valor, just bad luck. Do you know what his last words were? No. Check on Sloan. Gone. Not tell my wife I love her or I served with honor. Just check on Sloan. Like even in his final moment, he was still trying to be my father before being a soldier. Blackwood sat on the workbench beside her. And you've spent 6 years trying to honor that by being a perfect soldier. I've spent 6 years trying to prove he was right to check on me, right to worry about me, right to believe I could do this. And tonight, what are you trying to prove tonight? That I can bring people home, that I can be the commander he was but better, that I won't let ego or pride or the desire to be exceptional compromise the mission. Sloan, you've already proven all of that. You proved it when you gave those 4 Marines a second chance instead of ending their careers. You proved it when you trained them with patience instead of contempt. You proved it by caring about their growth more than your vindication. He stood. Tonight isn't about proving anything, it's about executing. Trust your training, trust your team, trust yourself. Everything else is just noise. At 2000 hours under cover of darkness, Sloan moved into position. The rooftop was accessed through an adjacent building's maintenance entrance. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, crossed 2 rooftops via a connecting catwalk, and settled into her final position behind a ventilation unit that provided both concealment and a stable shooting platform. 1,200 yards to Warehouse 7. She could see it clearly through her night vision scope. She ranged the distance with her laser rangefinder. 1,203 yards. Wind was 8 miles per hour from the northeast, gusting to 12. Temperature 54 degrees. Humidity 73%. She calculated the ballistic corrections in her head, adjusted her scope, and settled in to wait. Ghost in position, she reported over the encrypted radio net. Copy Ghost. Blackwood's voice came back from Tactical Operations Center. Ground elements report status. Anvil 1 in position. That was Crane at the south entrance. Anvil 2 in position. Wyatt at the west perimeter. And Anvil 3 in position. Cole at rear security. Anvil 4 in position. Finley at west approach. All elements ready, Blackwood confirmed. Time now is 20:07. Estimated hostile arrival time 2,200 hours. Hold positions. Stay alert. Stay quiet. Sloan lay prone behind her rifle and waited. This part never got easier. The waiting, the silence. The slow erosion of time when every minute felt like 10 and every sound made you calculate whether it was threat or environment. Rain started at 2,100 hours. Light at first, then heavier. It would make shooting more difficult, but it also provided acoustic cover. The sound of rain-masked footsteps covered radio communications, made it harder for hostiles to coordinate. Advantage Sloan's team. At 21:45, her radio crackled. Ghost Warhawk, thermal imaging, picking up movement at northern perimeter. 6 figures tactical formation moving toward Warehouse 7. Copy Warhawk, I have visual. Confirm 6 hostiles. Through her night vision scope, they appeared as green figures against darker green background, moving with professional spacing weapons at ready, clearly trained. Ground elements prepare for contact. Hostiles approaching from north. They're early. Anvil 1 copies. Anvil 2 copies. The 6 figures reached the north fence. One produced bolt cutters. 10 seconds later, they were through the perimeter. Warhawk hostiles have breached perimeter, moving toward warehouse. Copy Ghost. FBI en route, but still 90 minutes out. You're cleared hot. Ground elements hold position. Wait for my signal. Sloan watched them approach the warehouse. They moved in 2 3-man teams. Professional, experienced. Then she saw the 7th figure. Warhawk update. 7 hostiles, not 6. Repeat, 7 hostiles. 1 positioned as lookout at east corner. Copy Ghost. Update ROE all. 7 hostile. The main 6-man element reached the north entrance. 1 knelt working on the lock. The others provided security scanning in all directions. The 7th man, the lookout, moved to a position that gave him overwatch of the approaches. Smart, disciplined, professional. Through her scope, Sloan studied the lookout. He stood near a concrete barrier partially concealed but visible to her elevated position. Range 1,100 yards. Wind gusting. Target partially obscured. Not an easy shot, but necessary. Ground elements stand by for contact. Target 7, eliminating lookout. She controlled her breathing. In, out, in, out. Crosshairs centered on his chest. She led him slightly right to account for wind. She squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle made a sound like a hard cough. 1,100 yards away, the lookout dropped. Target down. 6 hostiles remaining entering warehouse. Copy Ghost. Engaging. The 6 hostiles had heard the suppressed shot. Not loud, but they were professionals. They knew what it meant. They accelerated their entry, moving through the door in rapid succession. Warhawk hostiles inside warehouse, switching to thermal overlay. On her tablet, mounted beside her rifle, thermal imaging showed 6 heat signatures moving through the warehouse interior, spreading out, searching. Ground elements hostiles are inside. Hold position. I'm tracking them on thermal. Through the warehouse skylights, she could see movement. The hostiles were using tactical lights, now searching for the nuclear material container. Warhawk, they're moving toward container Alpha 7. Copy Ghost. Ground elements prepared to breach on Ghost's command. The 6 hostiles converged on the container. 2 began working on the locks while 4 provided security. This was the moment. They were stationary, focused, vulnerable. Ground elements execute breach. Dynamic entry. Now! She heard the flashbangs detonate even from 1,200 yards away. Through the skylights, she saw the white flash. Then chaos. 2 of the hostiles near the container turned toward the breach point. Through the skylight, as Sloan had a clear view of them. She fired. The first hostile dropped. She adjusted. Fired again. The second hostile dropped. 2 down north section, she reported. On the ground, the 4 Marines were executing the breach flawlessly. Crane and Finley swept left, Wyatt and Cole right. A third hostile appeared on the second-floor catwalk. He pulled something from his vest. Grenade. Sloan tracked him. Range 900 yards. Elevated target. Moving. She led him by 8 inches. Fired. He dropped. The grenade fell from his hand, detonating on the catwalk away from any friendly forces. 3 down, 4 remaining. The remaining 4 hostiles had regrouped near Container Alpha 7, using it as cover. Smart. They knew the Marines couldn't risk shooting near the nuclear materials. "Ghost, we can't get clean shots without risking the payload," Crane reported. Through her scope, Sloan studied the situation. The hostiles were behind the reinforced container, barely visible, but the container had ventilation ports, 6-inch squares of metal grating. Through one port, she could see a hostile's shoulder. "All elements hold fire. I have an angle." Ghost, that's a 4-inch target at 1,200 yards through metal grating." "I'm aware. Hold fire." Sloan zoomed her scope to maximum magnification. The shoulder was visible through the grating, barely. The bullet would have to pass through the metal, which would deflect it. She calculated the deflection angle. 8 inches right, maybe 9. She breathed. In, out. She fired. Through the scope, she saw the hostile behind the container spin and collapse. The bullet had punched through the grating, deflected as calculated, and hit him in the upper chest. 4 down, 3 remaining. One of the remaining hostiles panicked. He broke cover, running for the north exit. Sloan tracked him. Range 1,000 yards. Moving target. She led him perfectly. She fired. He went down. 5 down, 2 remaining. The final 2 hostiles realized they were trapped. One grabbed something from his vest. "Suicide vest." Crane's voice came through urgent. "He's got a dead man switch." Through her scope, Sloan saw it. The hostile held a detonator switch with a shaking hand. If she killed him, his hand would release and the device would trigger. The explosion would be too close to the nuclear materials. "Ghost, I don't have a shot that won't trigger the switch," Crane reported. Neither did Sloan. A shot to his chest or head would make him drop the switch. Then she saw it. A wire ran from the detonator in his hand to the vest. Thin wire, maybe 16 gauge. She adjusted her aim. Not for the man, for the wire. At 1,200 yards, the wire was barely visible, 2 millimeters thick in her scope. The wind had picked up. "If I miss, the explosion goes off. If I hit, we're clear," she said quietly into the radio. She breathed. The wire filled her crosshairs. She fired. The wire severed cleanly. The hostile looked down in confusion at the now disconnected detonator. He had half a second to process before Crane shot him twice in the chest. The 7th hostile, seeing his partner fall, raised his hands in surrender. "Hostiles surrendering," Crane reported, securing him now. "All hostiles down or captured," Sloan said. "Warehouse 7 is secure." Ghost Warhawk, confirm hostile count. 7 hostiles, 6 neutralized, 1 in custody, nuclear materials intact, no friendly casualties. There was a pause on the radio. "Copy that, Ghost. 7 targets, 7 shots, 1,200 yards maximum engagement range. Outstanding work." Sloan let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Ground elements secure the area. FBI is inbound. Well done, everyone." She packed her rifle and made her way down from the rooftop. By the time she reached the warehouse, FBA had arrived and was processing the scene. The surviving hostile was in custody. The deceased were being documented. The 4 Marines stood near the south entrance, exhausted but alive. When they saw Sloan approaching, they straightened. "Ma'am," Crane said, "that shot, the wire on the detonator, I've never seen anything like that." "Neither have I," Wyatt added. That was impossible." "No," Sloan said simply. "It was necessary. There's a difference." Finley stepped forward. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely." "Granted. 10 days ago, I wouldn't have trusted you with my life. Not because you're a woman, but because I didn't know you. Didn't know what you were capable of. Tonight, you saved all of us with shots I didn't think were possible. I just want to say thank you, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. Private, you have nothing to apologize for. You performed flawlessly tonight. All of you did." Cole spoke up, his voice shaky with adrenaline come down. "Ma'am, when you said you'd lost 0 personnel in 13 prior operations, I thought maybe you'd just been lucky. Now I understand. You didn't lose anyone because you're that good, because you see things others don't, because you make impossible shots when it matters." Sloan looked at all 4 of them. "I didn't make those shots alone. I made them because you executed your roles perfectly, because you trusted my calls, because you functioned as a team instead of 4 individuals trying to be heroes. That's why we succeeded tonight. Blackwood approached carrying a tablet. FBI data wants statements from everyone, but first the Admiral wants a word. They walked to the Tactical Operations Center, where Admiral Thompson was reviewing the operation footage. He looked up as they entered. Gentlemen, in 30 years of military service, I've witnessed a lot of operations. That was one of the cleanest I've ever seen. 7 hostiles neutralized with minimal shots, fired no collateral damage, no friendly casualties, and nuclear materials secured. Textbook execution. He stood. Lieutenant Ashford, your shooting tonight will be studied in SEAL training courses for years. Sergeant Crane, your breach timing was perfect. Corporal Drummond, your discipline under pressure was exemplary. Private Brennan, your rear security prevented any hostile escape. Private Rhodes, your west approach defense was critical. Thompson picked up 4 folders from his desk. Your evaluations have been finalized. All 4 of you are approved for Joint Task Force operations. Additionally, based on tonight's performance, I'm recommending all 4 of you for commendation. Crane's eyes widened. Sir, we just did our jobs. No, Sergeant. You did far more than your jobs. You took a situation that could have become a national security disaster and turned it into a successful operation. That's not just doing your job. That's exceeding every expectation. After the briefing, after the statements, after the post-operation procedures, Sloan found herself alone with Blackwood in the parking lot at 0300 hours. You should be proud, he said. I'm relieved. There's a difference. 10 days ago, those 4 Marines humiliated you in a bar. Tonight, they trusted you with their lives and you brought them home. That's a hell of a transformation. They did the transforming. I just provided the environment. That's what good commanders do. Create the conditions for growth, then step back and let it happen. Sloan looked up at the sky. The rain had stopped. Stars were visible between the clouds. My father would have failed them all on day 1. Maybe, but he also would have recognized what you recognized. That failure at the start doesn't mean failure at the end. Some people just need the right incentive to evolve. Do you think it'll stick, the lessons they learned? I think tonight made it permanent. Nothing teaches humility like realizing the person you underestimated is the one who saved your life. They'll never forget that. Day 12, 0800 hours. The briefing room was full for the final evaluation. Admiral Thompson, Master Chief Blackwood, the 4 Marines, Sloan, and several base commanders who'd heard about the operation. Sloan stood at attention as Thompson reviewed the after-action report on his tablet. 7 hostiles neutralized, 7 shots fired from sniper position. Maximum range 1,200 yards, including 1 shot that severed a detonator wire to prevent explosive detonation. He looked up. Lieutenant Ashford, in 30 years of reviewing after-action reports, I've never seen a cleaner operation with a smaller margin for error. This operation will be used as a case study in precision tactics. Well done. Thank you, sir. But it was a team effort. Which brings us to the evaluation results. The 4 Marines sat straighter. Thompson opened the first folder. Sergeant Crane, 2 weeks ago you demonstrated poor judgment, ego-driven leadership, and fundamental lack of respect for fellow service members. Over 14 days of training and 1 live operation, you showed capacity for growth, willingness to listen to subordinates, and the ability to execute orders without improvisation or glory-seeking. He looked directly at Crane. Your final assessment approved for Joint Task Force operations with commendation for performance under fire. Additionally, you're being recommended for promotion to Staff Sergeant and selection for advanced leadership training. Crane's eyes widened. Thank you, sir. Thompson moved to the next folder. Corporal Drummond, your psychological profile suggested anger management issues rooted in personal trauma. During this evaluation, you confronted those issues, channeled your energy productively, and demonstrated loyalty to team over personal grievances. The final assessment approved for joint operations. Additionally, Lieutenant Ashford initiated a formal review of your sister's case with JAG. That review uncovered sufficient evidence to reopen the investigation. Criminal charges are being filed against the officer involved. Wyatt's jaw tightened with emotion. He looked at Sloan. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. Say you'll be the kind of leader your sister needed. That's enough. Thompson continued. Private Brennan, you demonstrated adequate performance as a team member, but lacked independent decision-making capability. However, under live fire conditions, you maintained composure and executed your role flawlessly. Final assessment approved for joint operations and support role. Continue developing initiative, but know that your reliability under pressure is valued. Thank you, sir. Private Rhodes. Thompson smiled slightly. You consistently demonstrated superior tactical judgment, emotional regulation, and the courage to speak up when you identified problems. Last night, your West approach defense prevented hostile escape. Lieutenant Ashford has recommended you for accelerated training and early promotion consideration. Final assessment approved for joint operations with fast-track leadership development. You're being assigned to SEAL training pipeline as a Marine liaison. If you complete the program, you'll be among the first Marines integrated into SEAL teams. Finley looked stunned. Thank you, sir. Thompson stood. Gentlemen, 2 weeks ago, you were Marines who made bad decisions in a bar. Last night, you were operators who prevented a terrorist attack and saved nuclear materials from hostile acquisition. That transformation is why this program exists, to find people capable of growth and give them the tools to achieve it. He looked at each of them. You've earned your place in this program. You've earned the respect you weren't given 2 weeks ago, and you've earned the right to call yourselves professionals. Don't waste it. Yes, sir, they said in unison. Dismissed, except Lieutenant Ashford. After the Marines left, Thompson turned to Sloan. Your father would have been proud of what you did, both the operation and the training. He would have made the same calls. Maybe. But he might not have given those Marines a second chance. Thomas was brilliant, but he was also rigid. You showed flexibility without compromising standards. That's harder than it looks. He handed her a folder. Your next assignment, 6 weeks advanced tactical training with DevGru, then you're rotating to a training billet. You'll be developing curriculum for the next generation of integration officers. A training billet. You're being groomed for command lieutenant. Strategic command. Someone needs to build the bridge between services, between old thinking and new capability. You've proven you can do it. Sir, I'm more effective in the field. You're more valuable training others to be effective in the field. That's an order, Lieutenant. Don't argue with me. She smiled slightly. Wouldn't dream of it, sir. After the briefing, Blackwood walked her out. You know what today is? Day 12 of the evaluation. It's also 14 days since you sat in that bar and let those men humiliate you. 14 days from underestimation to vindication. That's a hell of a journey. It wasn't about vindication. I know. It was about transformation. Theirs and yours. You went into that bar as someone who needed to prove herself. You came out of last night's operation as someone who doesn't need to prove anything anymore. They reached the parking lot. Chief, can I ask you something? Always. That shot, the wire. When I was lining it up, I thought about my father, about how he would have taken the shot that was safer, the one that might have triggered the explosion but had higher probability of success. I chose the harder shot because it was the right shot. Did I make the right call? Blackwood considered this carefully. Your father would have made the safe shot and lived with the consequences if it went wrong. You made the right shot and lived with the risk if it went wrong. You're both commanders, just different kinds. Neither approach is wrong, they're just different priorities. But which is better? The one that brings everyone home. Last night yours did. That's the only measure that matters. 2 weeks later, Sloan found herself back at Walker's Cove. Same dim lights, same warped floor, same smell of fried food and old wood. She ordered water with a lemon wedge and sat at the corner booth where it had all started. Liam brought it over without comment. Just that same respectful nod. 10 minutes later, the door opened. 4 Marines walked in. Crane, Wyatt, Cole, Finley. They wore civilian clothes, relaxed and confident in a way they hadn't been 2 weeks ago. They saw her immediately and approached without hesitation. Ma'am, Crane said, mind if we join you? Sloan gestured to the empty seats. It's a free country. They sat down. Liam brought beers for them without being asked. They'd become regulars. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Crane cleared his throat. 2 weeks ago in this bar, we were assholes. There's no other word for it. We treated you like you didn't matter because we thought you didn't. We were wrong about a lot of things, but mostly we were wrong about thinking people don't matter until they prove otherwise. Wyatt added, you gave us a chance to be better. Most people wouldn't have. They would have just ended our careers and moved on. You didn't. So, thank you. Sloan looked at each of them. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because the military needs operators who can learn from mistakes, who can look at their worst moment and choose to do better next time. You did that. Keep doing it. Cole spoke up. Ma'am, can I ask something that's been bothering me? Off duty, you don't need permission. That night in the bar, when we spilled those drinks, did you know then how it would end? Sloan smiled slightly. I knew you'd end up somewhere. Whether it was sitting here as colleagues or sitting in a JAG office facing charges was up to you. I'm glad it was this. Finley leaned forward. Ma'am Sloan, one more thing. Yes, that shot, the wire on the detonator, 1,200 yards. How the hell did you make that? She thought about her answer, about her father, about 6 years of proving herself, about every moment she'd been underestimated and had to exceed expectations just to be taken seriously. Practice. And the understanding that failure wasn't an option, same way you'll make impossible shots someday. When the mission demands it and people's lives depend on it, you'll find capabilities you didn't know you had. Crane nodded slowly. I believe that now. 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have. But I do now. They talked for an hour about their next assignments, about the training ahead, about the mission that had changed everything. As they were leaving, Wyatt stopped at the door. Sloan, I heard about my sister's case. They reopened it. The officer who assaulted her is being charged. After 3 years of nothing, suddenly there's justice. That was you, wasn't it? That was JAG doing their job properly. Because you made them look. Because you cared enough to push it forward when everyone else had buried it. Your sister deserved justice. Now she's getting it. That's all that matters. After they left, Sloan sat alone in the booth for a few more minutes. Liam came by with fresh water. They're different now, he observed. Same four from before, but different. People change when they have to, or when someone believes they can. Liam smiled. Your father used to come in here sometimes. Before Afghanistan, he'd sit in that same booth, said it had the best tactical view in the place. He taught me that. Always sit where you can see the whole room. He also said something else. Said the most dangerous person in any situation isn't the one making the most noise. It's the one watching, learning, waiting for the right moment to act. Sloan finished her water and stood. He was usually right about those things. Outside, the California night was clear. Stars visible above the amber glow of streetlights. The distant sound of surf rolling in from the Pacific. She climbed into her truck and sat for a moment before starting the engine. 14 days ago, she'd driven away from this bar, covered in spilled beer, knowing what tomorrow would bring, but not knowing how it would end. Tonight, she drove away having transformed 4 Marines who'd learned the lessons she'd been trying to teach. That respect isn't demanded. It's earned. That strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. That the person you underestimate might be the one who saves your life. She pulled onto the highway, heading back toward base, toward her next assignment, toward whatever came next. Behind her, Walker's Cove faded into darkness. But the lesson remained. Sharp, clear, undeniable. The most dangerous person in the room is never the one shouting. It's the one watching, waiting, remembering. The one who sees potential in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. The one who gives second chances, not out of weakness, but out of strength. The one who understands that vindication isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving they can be better. And sometimes, just sometimes, they prove you right. Sloan drove through the night, the road ahead illuminated by headlights, the past 2 weeks compressed into lessons that would last a lifetime. For her, for them, for everyone who'd witnessed the transformation. From contempt to respect, from humiliation to honor, from underestimation to vindication. 14 days, 7 shots, 4 lives changed, 1 mission accomplished. And somewhere in the darkness, the quiet woman from the corner booth smiled, knowing that the most powerful victories are the ones where everyone comes home better than they started. Not just alive, but transformed, exactly as intended.